Hi everyone, and welcome to our final Job Talks session. Tonight's focus is going to be on a non-for-profit sector. So this event gives students the opportunity to hear from young communication professionals in the non-for-profit sector and gain better understanding of career options and paths available to them after graduation. My name is Gab. I'm the Vice President of Senior Affairs for the Communication Student Association, and moderating with me tonight is Jennifer Dumoulin, co-president of the Communication Graduate Student Association, and Professor Jean-Sébastien Merrier. As always, we will start with a brief introduction of each panelist, and then we will ask them a few questions that were prepared beforehand. After that, we will then open up the floor to the audience and have a Q&A period. Of course, if you have any questions that you would like to ask but are not comfortable turning on your microphone, you can put the question, either French or English, in the chat and we can ask them on your behalf.
Merci Gab. Alors bonjour à tous et à tous. Bienvenue à notre dernière session sur la série des emplois en communication. Ce soir, l'accent serait sur le secteur à but non lucratif. Cet événement donne aux étudiants et étudiantes l'occasion d'entendre des jeunes professionnels de la communication dans le secteur du but à non lucratif ce soir et de mieux comprendre les options de carrière et la voie qui s'offre à eux après obtenir le diplôme. Je m'appelle Jennifer Dumoulin et je suis la coprésidente de l'Association des étudiants et étudiantes diplômés en communication. Avec moi comme modératrice ce soir est Nicolette Duff, vice-présidente d'affaires senior de l'Association des étudiants en communication et aussi professeur Jean-Sébastien Merrier. Comme toujours, nous commencerons par une brève présentation de chaque panéliste, puis ensuite nous leur poserons quelques questions préparées à l'avance. Ensuite, nous donnerons la parole à l'audience et nous aurons une période de questions. Bien entendu, si vous avez des questions que vous aimeriez poser, mais vous n'êtes pas confortable à allumer vos microphones, vous pouvez les poser en français ou en anglais dans le chat et soit moi ou Gabrielle, on pourrait les poser en votre nom.
All right, so we have three amazing panelists tonight. We have Nicolette Addesa, Hayley Robateau, and Tracey Evans. So Nicolette Addesa is a senior, I'm having trouble speaking today, full disclosure. Nicolette is the senior account executive at Edelman, an independent communication agency. Prior to joining Edelman's, she managed her own communication practice where she helped small businesses achieve their communication objectives. Prior to starting her own business, she managed communications for ADGA Group Consultants in Ottawa, having come from working with the City of Ottawa, where she handled media relations, social platforms, and crisis communications. Nicolette is also on the executive committee of the nonprofit organization Young Diplomats of Canada, serving as their director of communications. YDC is a national, nonpartisan, youth-led nonprofit organization that aims to break down barriers of decision-making at the highest levels of global diplomacy. YDC hopes to mainstream youth engagement in big policy discussion within spaces such as the G20 and G7 meetings. When Nicolette is not teaching yoga or visiting art galleries, she enjoys giving back to her local and global community. She's the president of the University of Ottawa Alumni Council, a director on the board of the Young Leaders Circle, and a mentor of Girls 20.
Alors, ce soir, nous avons trois panélistes très extraordinaires, Nicolette Addesa, Hayley Robateau et Tracey Evans. Pour commencer, Nicolette Addesa est une Senior Account Executive chez Edelman's, une agence de communication indépendante. Avant de rejoindre Edelman's, elle a dirigé son propre service de communication où elle aidait les petites entreprises à atteindre leurs objectifs de communication. Avant de créer sa propre entreprise, Nicolette a géré les communications pour un groupe de consultants à Ottawa, après avoir travaillé pour la ville d'Ottawa où elle s'occupait des relations avec les médias, des plateformes sociales et des communications de crise. Nicolette fait également partie du comité exécutif de l'organisation à but non lucratif Jeunes Diplômés du Canada, le GDC, dont elle est la directrice de communication. GDC est une organisation nationale, non partisane et à but non lucratif dirigée par des jeunes qui vise à faire tomber les barrières de la prise de décision au plus haut niveau de la diplomatie mondiale. GDC espère intégrer l'engagement des jeunes dans les grandes discussions politiques au sein des espaces tels que les réunions du G20 et G7. Lorsque Nicolette n'enseigne pas le yoga ou ne visite pas des galeries d'art, elle aime redonner à sa communauté locale et mondiale. Elle est présidente du Conseil des anciens et anciennes de l'Université d'Ottawa, membre du conseil d'administration du Cercle des jeunes leaders et mentor de Girls 20.
All right, so second we have Hayley Robateau. She is the Senior Manager of Public Relations for United Way, East Ontario. After graduating with an Honours Bachelor of Public Relations from the University of Ottawa and a Diploma in Public Relations from Algonquin College, she has worked for a public affairs agency, local and national art organization and festivals, post-secondary institutions, national advocacy associations, and now a local charity. Hayley has focused her career on using communications for your social good. With a specialty in media relations and content marketing, she uses storytelling to highlight the human impacts of social issues and empower audiences to take action. While the pandemic has kept Hayley off the stage, where she used to perform comedic improv with her troupe A Little Awkward, it has empowered her to take up sewing her own clothes, daily yoga practice, and growing her own indoor jungle, although sometimes it is thwarted by her small house panther.
Alors, notre deuxième panéliste est Hayley Robateau, qui est la directrice principale des relations publiques de Centraide de l'Est de l'Ontario. Après avoir obtenu son diplôme en relations publiques à l'Université d'Ottawa et un diplôme en relations publiques au Collège d'Algonquin, elle a travaillé pour une agence d'affaires publiques, des organisations et des festivals artistiques locaux et nationaux, des établissements d'enseignement supérieur, des associations nationales de défense, j'ai perdu mon fil, National de défense des droits et aujourd'hui une organisation caritative locale. Hayley a axé sa carrière sur l'utilisation des communications pour le bien social. Spécialisée dans les relations avec les médias et le marketing de contenu, elle utilise les recettes pour mettre en évidence l'impact humain des problèmes sociaux et donner au public les moyens d'agir. Si la pandémie a empêché Hayley de monter sur scène où elle jouait de l'improvisation comique avec sa troupe A Little Awkward, elle lui a permis de se consacrer à la culture de ses propres vêtements, à la pratique quotidienne de yoga et à la culture de sa propre jungle intérieure, bien que cela soit parfois contrecarré par sa petite panthère domestique.
All right, and last but certainly not least, Tracey Evans grew up with parents who worked in the airline industry and spent most of her childhood on planes, bouncing from one country to the next and learning to explore new cultures from a young age. She holds a bachelor's degree in international development and global studies from the University of Ottawa and a master's degree in international conflict resolution and mediation from Tel Aviv University. She's currently pursuing a doctorate of education in international education leadership and policy at the University of Toronto. During her undergraduate degree, Tracey spent her summers volunteering in West and South Africa on HIV/AIDS and environmental conservation projects. Afterwards, she spent 8 months completing the Aga Khan Foundation Canada Youth Fellowship Program, which sent her to Bangladesh for 8 months, during which she worked with CARE Bangladesh on women's economic empowerment and rural livelihood projects. Tracey worked for Aga Khan Foundation Canada in Ottawa from 2015 until 2020 as an education program manager, managing a portfolio of gender-responsive education programs across East and West Africa and in Central Asia that cut across the lifelong ladder of learning from early childhood education through a post-secondary education. In January of this year, she joined Right to Play as a Director of Global Partnerships, where she oversees the organization's institutional relationship with Global Affairs Canada. She's constantly inspired by the learners, teachers, and parents she gets to work with and firmly believes that education is the world's greatest asset for promoting gender equality.
Merci, Gab. Alors, notre dernière panéliste est, I realize I have no idea how to say last but not least in French, so I can't quite translate that directly. Alors, notre dernière panéliste, Tracey Evans, a grandi avec des parents qui travaillaient dans l'industrie aérienne et a passé une grande partie de son enfance dans les avions, rebondissant d'un pays à l'autre et apprenant à explorer de nouvelles cultures dès son plus jeune âge. Elle est titulaire d'un diplôme en développement international et études mondiales de l'Université d'Ottawa et d'une maîtrise en résolution de conflits internationaux et médiation de l'Université de Tel Aviv. Elle poursuit actuellement un doctorat en éducation, en leadership et en politique de l'éducation internationale à l'Université de Toronto. Pendant ses études de premier cycle, Tracey a passé ses étés à faire du bénévolat en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Sud dans le cadre des projets de lutte contre le VIH et le sida et de conservation de l'environnement. Elle a ensuite passé 8 mois à suivre le programme de bourse pour les jeunes de la Fondation Aga Khan Canada, qui l'a envoyée au Bangladesh pendant 8 mois, au cours desquels elle a travaillé avec Care Bangladesh sur des projets d'autonomisation économique des femmes et de moyens de subsistance en milieu rural. Tracey a travaillé pour la Fondation Aga Canada à Ottawa de 2015 à 2020 en tant que responsable des programmes d'éducation, gérant un portefeuille de programmes d'éducation sensibles aux gens à travers l'Afrique de l'Est et de l'Ouest et en Asie centrale, qui couvre l'échelle de l'apprentissage tout au long de la vie, de l'éducation, de la petite enfance jusqu'à l'enseignement postsecondaire. En janvier de cette année, elle a rejoint Right to Play en tant que directrice des partenariats mondiaux, où elle supervise la relation institutionnelle de l'organisation avec Affaires mondiales Canada. Elle est constamment inspirée par les apprenants, les enseignants et les parents avec lesquels elle travaille et croit fermement que l'éducation est le plus grand atout du monde pour promouvoir l'égalité des sexes.
All right, so even though we just kind of introduced you guys all, just in 2 or 3 sentences, tell us about your current job, kind of like your day-to-day work, kind of. We can start with, we'll start with Hayley. Oh, no, we'll start with how we introduced you guys. So we'll go Nicolette, Hayley, and then Tracey, if that works.
Alors, juste en français, la première question préparée pour ce soir, est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler de votre emploi actuel? And feel free to answer in either English and French. Alors, vous pouvez répondre soit en anglais, en français ou dans une combinaison des deux.
Donc, moi, je vais commencer en français. Je m'appelle Nicolette. Je travaille à Edelman, qui est une firme de relations publiques. Puis, sur le côté, dans mes moments libres, je fais du bénévolat au sein des jeunes diplomates du Canada. So in English, by day, I work in PR at an agency, and by night, I volunteer with the Young Diplomats of Canada.
Hello,
Is that
everyone.
it?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I'll cut you off, Nicolette. Now that's it. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I unfortunately do not live up to the French-sounding last name that I have. Mon français n'est pas bien, alors je vais peut-être tout parler en anglais. Alors that's the end of that for me tonight. So I apologize. Yeah, so I'm the senior manager of public relations at United Way East Ontario, which is a charity based in Ottawa that serves the communities of Ottawa, Prescott Russell, Lanark County, and Renfrew County. And we basically cover a whole wide range of different social issues in the community. And so how my work plays into that is I have an overarching view of our organization's brand in the community, and I do a lot of reputational risk mitigation and crisis communications, which has been almost my entire year, it feels like, is a crisis communications every day. But I also get to do a lot of storytelling. So I produce videos. I work with a team that makes a lot of blogs and social media content that tells our stories of impact and challenges and needs, which I think has given me an insight into our community that I didn't have before this job. So yeah, and as I mentioned, prior to the pandemic was a performer trying to make people laugh. I do less of that now, but that was my nighttime gig, whereas Nicolette mentioned that as well. Yeah, that's my little overview.
Great, I can go ahead and jump right in. Hi everyone, my name is Tracey Evans. Je suis contente de répondre aux questions en français, mais pour la conversation en ce moment, je vais juste parler en anglais. I currently work at Right to Play, which is an international nonprofit organization headquartered in Toronto. I'm based in Ottawa. And Right to Play's overarching mandate is to protect, educate, and empower children living in vulnerable crisis situations, and to do all of that through the power of play. So we leverage play as a tool with which we can engage kids and kind of help them through difficult situations that they might be living through and kind of come out the other side stronger and better prepared to take on real world challenges that eventually they will face. In that organization, as the Director of Global Partnerships, I oversee Right to Play's overall relationship with Global Affairs Canada, so the Government of Canada's kind of international aid agency, which is our organization's largest institutional donor across the map. So it's a very important relationship that I get to kind of spearhead. My role directly is not in comms per se. We have our own kind of communications team, but I work really closely with them. And part of the way that we interact with each other is myself kind of managing a portfolio of international projects that are being paid by Canadian taxpayers and by Global Affairs Canada. I'm kind of responsible for bringing stories from, the countries in which we're programming back to Canada to let Canadians know where their investments are going and what kind of impact they're having. And I will say for myself, I didn't study communications. It's not my area of expertise. But any organization I've ever worked or volunteered with, especially as it relates to international development, I myself am very selective about only working for organizations whose communication strategies and brands I really align with, especially in a sector when you're working with vulnerable populations. It's really important to make sure that you're representing them fairly and in a positive and strong light. And I know that at least as it relates to international aid, I've often seen photos that kind of exploit the people that we're actually trying to serve and help just by, virtue of wanting to fundraise more money. And so I worked with Aga Khan Foundation up until January for 5.5 years. And now with Right to Play, they're two organizations who I really respect the way that they photograph and represent the stakeholders they're trying to serve. And so that's something that I've always really prided the organizations I work for on. And I think it's really important that anyone working in communications for that kind of an area takes into consideration. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. So our next question is, how were the first few years into the workforce after graduation? So that could be after your undergrad or after other studies. Sorry, that didn't make sense, but you know what I mean.
Alors, notre deuxième question est comment se sont déroulées les premières années sur le marché du travail après que vous avez obtenu vos diplômes, soit vos diplômes de premier cycle ou des diplômes des études supérieures ou un deuxième diplôme de premier cycle aussi. You all have a variety of education experience. Alors, si vous pouvez parler de ça, ça serait très bien apprécié.
So I'll talk about after my master's. So I was also part of the CGSA when I was at U Ottawa, pretty active with them and with La GSAD as well. And they offered me a great opportunity to network with, like-minded communication scholars, but then outside and around Canada. So after graduation, I really leveraged those networks, tried to see what people were doing. I would meet a lot of people for coffee. My go-to was scouring LinkedIn and see, who do I want to work for, who do I want to work with, and just meeting them for coffee. And I got a few no's, but I got a few yeses. And that's actually how I landed my job. I was hoping to line it up after I had graduated from my master's, but life doesn't work that way. Timing is always funny. And I had gotten an opportunity to work at the City of Ottawa in comms, which is exactly what I wanted to do. And I loved it. And I remember feeling like $1 million, first job out of university, was super happy. And then again, life has a funny way of redirecting your life. And at that time, the city had hired a new city manager who decided that he wanted to make certain cuts in different departments, and the communications department was one of them. And I remember we went from 50 something staff to about 13. So of course, last one in, first one out. So I was part of those cuts, and I remember just feeling completely deflated. Life definitely served me a little slice of humble pie at that moment. And it was a good kind of lesson for me to, go back to those habits that I had formed right out of university. So going back on LinkedIn, going back to making those calls and connecting with folks. So that would be a little tidbit of what post-graduation was like for me, and a little tip that I hope might be useful to some.
I think for me, I took advantage both. So I did the University of Ottawa's public relations program, which is in partnership with Algonquin College. So I think throughout the course of that, I took advantage of a lot of experiential learning opportunities because I was admittedly not a big academic person. Like I didn't love just being in a classroom. I also wanted to be kind of experiencing things out in the quote unquote real world, I guess. So yeah, I did a lot of work placements when I was at university. I did a lot of volunteering, and same when I was in college. Was I kind of started seeking out where I could use my newfound skills that maybe weren't enough to get myself a job yet, but I could exercise them in different ways. And so I also, like Nicolette, did some networking, but I'm not a huge networker either. So I don't think that has to be like the place where you gain connections. But to Tracey's point too, I've always been really interested in aligning my work with my values. And so in those early days after I graduated, I was trying to find out where I would fit with both feeling confident about the work that I was pursuing, and also getting those opportunities to use those skills and grow them. And so I think what was helpful for me was that I started saying yes to like everything that came across my plate, and just like trying things out, knowing that they didn't have to be permanent if I didn't like them. I did, thinking back to the schedule that I held at some points when I was in university and then just graduated, of like doing so many different volunteer opportunities and trying out freelancing and different things like that. It was unbelievable how much time I had at that point. I don't know why I don't have that time anymore. But yeah, it really helped hone in on what I liked to do so that I could then figure out what I wanted to say no to. It was, learning that I really wanted to be in the not-for-profit sector, or perhaps in the kind of grassroots activism sector. And I learned through different jobs that I had gained that I wanted to be able to see the impact of my work firsthand. And so it's been really important to me that I have, human interactions with the people that I work with. So yeah, I think it was a lot of like trying little things and like not really knowing what I wanted to do with any of them. It took quite some time, even through university, through college, for me to understand like what I wanted to do. But I think the really helpful thing about communications is that you can apply it in, like an endless realm of possibilities. Communications is a tool that you can apply to different sectors, to different jobs. Like Tracey said, like you don't have to work in communications to definitely use those skills really well in your job. So I think I felt empowered by the education that I had and the skills that I had gained to just kind of figure it out. Ask people about what they did, learn by experience, by just like trying things out. So yeah, it felt a bit like not like a free fall, but kind of like jumping into a ball pit and just like picking up all the different balls and seeing which ones I wanted to hold on to.
From my perspective or my experience, I guess it's an interesting question. Like, what did you do after school? Because I'm still in school, so that chapter of my life has not fully closed. One thing that's been really helpful for me is kind of pacing out my educational journey, and I didn't know that it was going to go that way. I think I'm like Nicolette. I've been thrown a lot of curveballs and just kind of try to take them as they come. But when I finished my undergraduate degree, one thing that was really clear, for at least for international development professionals that are trying to become program managers in this sector, is you won't get too far without a graduate degree. So especially when I'm talking to like international development undergrads, that is a message I make clear. But it's still really relevant for this discussion because I know many of you are in graduate school. And so you've already taken that leap from undergrad to graduate. Now you may be toying with the idea of, postgraduate education as well. So as I was transitioning from my undergrad to, what comes next, I explored a lot of different options and I threw my hat into like many different rings because of the stress and anxiety that comes with worrying about what if I don't get into any of them. So that included applying to grad school, as well as the Aga Khan International Youth Fellowship, which was referenced in my bio, and then a few other things as well. And I was lucky enough to be successful in several of those options, and then essentially had to toy with the idea of, do I do grad school or not? And a lot of times there's a lot of conflicting advice that you'll get on that question. And the challenge I was worried about with regards to putting off grad school is that they say, if you go out into the workforce and start working and making money, it's really hard to like pull yourself out of that to go back into school and retransition into student life. Whereas on the flip side, there are risks that come with sometimes, following like a straight academic path and never leaving the classroom and transitioning those skills into the real world. You could end up with like 2 PhDs, but, no concrete work experience, and then there's that reverse gap. And I think that's a question everyone asks themselves. So eventually for myself, I decided I did want to, leave academia for a time. And that's why I took the international fellowship, which sent me to Bangladesh for 8 months. And then after that, I felt a bit more prepared to go into my master's. And what I found in doing that was that once I got to my master's, I was referencing so much of that experience I had had in Bangladesh. And it actually made me, I think, a much better contributor to my cohort and to the classroom, and also helped me know a lot more about what I wanted to get out of that program. So then I did the master's, and afterwards I started working at Aga Khan Foundation for 5.5 years. And throughout that journey, I didn't, pick to go into education programming. I was put there because essentially of, the way the stars aligned. And then over the course of 5 years, I fell in love with international education to the point that I decided this is what I want to focus my career on. And I want to be working on international education programs in the long term. So then I applied for a doctorate in international education. 7 years ago, I would have never guessed that that was the journey I was going to go on. And so taking that time to be in the classroom, go out and see how all of that translates and what you want to learn more about, and then going back, that in and out has been really helpful for me in allowing me to kind of learn where I want to be and what I want to do. I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I think our generation increasingly just has to be. And that can be challenging when you're trying to enter new chapters of your life and put school behind you so you can focus on other things. But on the flip side, it's a really beautiful thing as well to get to constantly push yourself to learn and see how you can apply those learnings in real time. And I have the very unique benefit right now of doing my Ed.D. whilst working full-time. It's a doctorate program that was designed for full-time working professionals. And I think doctorate programs in general are starting to want to move towards more practical applications rather than kind of extracting people from their day-to-day lives for 5 to 7 years to hone in on one topic. There's a lot of options out there that are becoming a lot more integrated, and that's what I'm doing. And it's a great balance of on my day-to-day, taking what I do at Right to Play and bringing it to my cohort online within school, and then getting to do a thesis that's going to be about one of the projects I'm actually managing. So that's been really interesting for me, and something that when I was doing my undergrad, I never thought I'd be doing a doctorate, but life is full of surprises. So here I am. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, all of those experiences were really interesting and pretty different as well. Myself, I'm graduating this spring, and just kind of hearing your experiences kind of makes me a little bit nervous, but also kind of reassures me a little bit that just because I don't know what I'm doing right this second doesn't mean that I won't figure it out at some point. So thank you. So we've already touched base on what your undergrad programs were, or your other programs, but how did that schooling prepare you for the job market?
Alors, notre troisième question touche sur comment vos études vous avez préparé pour votre marché de travail, soit vos diplômes de premier cycle ou vos diplômes de cycle supérieur.
So if you would have asked high school Nico what her dream job would have been, I would have given you something generic, like, I don't know, lawyer, doctor, I don't know. If you would have told me that I would be spending my days writing and storytelling, I would have not believed you at all. Writing was never something that I enjoyed doing. I had a journal growing up on and off, but it was really embarrassing things. And when I applied to university, I did my undergrad in French literature, and I loved to read and I loved to consume, but I wasn't really confident, I guess, enough, or I didn't find my voice yet to be able to put pen to paper. Then when I got to the master's level, I did the course-based master's in communication. And that showed me kind of what Hayley was saying earlier about how communications could be applied to any and every field. So I took classes in communications and engineering, communications and, politics, I can't even think of them all because they were all so different. And that really allowed me to find my voice and my tone and how I want to tell a story in these given fields. So for me, it was like a learning not only of the subject matter, but of myself and a deepening of who I am. And I bring that to all of my clients. So now in agency, one day I'll be working in tech, the next day I'll be working with farmers, the next day I'll be working with a politician, and I'll have to bring that to them, and I'll have to, connect with them in a way that I'm able to accurately tell their story in a way that is relatable to the audience that they're trying to reach. So I think, I can name all of the hard and soft skills that I learned in class, but I think the deeper ones are really, finding my voice as a communications professional.
I talked about this briefly, but something that I think was really valuable for me in my undergraduate program and my college degree was the taking the lens of like how this might be applied outside of the classroom. So whether that was those volunteer experiences that I was getting involved in, the on-campus work that I was doing. What I really found valuable was taking the mindset of like, okay, I have to do this research paper on whatever topic. How might this look in a portfolio when I would apply to a job? Like, what are the skills that I used in assembling this? Whether it's writing, researching, maybe you interviewed someone for something that you've done. So now you can say that you have interview skills. Something that I did a lot of for fun was like video editing. And so now that's become a multimedia communication skill that I draw on every so often. So I take the opportunity to critically think about the work that you're doing for class and using that to apply to real world skills that you might have in the workplace. Something that someone has told me once before was that once you kind of get a sense of what type of job that you might want to have, start looking at those job applications or job postings and see what skills they look for when they're hiring someone. And maybe you don't necessarily have the full range of experience that they're looking for, but it can give you a sense of the type of skills that you want to work towards. So, let's say you wanted to do a job like mine, critical thinking and like interpersonal relationships and things like that. Just like think about how those skills might be applied in your schoolwork and making note of that. I used a lot of my school projects, both a couple from university, but a lot from college, because that is tailored directly to like bringing you into the workforce for that field. But I use them as portfolio pieces and showing people how I'm proving that I can do this. Maybe I don't have 2 to 3 years of job experience, but I do definitely have 2 years of experience in creating projects for theoretical clients or, actual clients, which was sometimes the experience that I had in both university and college, which I found incredibly valuable. So I think that was the most useful thing was portfolio building, I guess, from both an informal and formal perspective. I also think Nicolette kind of didn't touch on it, but I do think the most important takeaways that I have from my undergrad are the soft skills that I gained, like not the grades or, XYZ product that I wrote for class, but, the researching, the writing, like the kind of broader skills that you get from being in university, the time management, working against deadlines, things like that have all been super valuable in my work experience. So I think that would be something that I would encourage you to take like a 20,000 view on your degree and not the minutia of like what I have learned about the hypodermic needle theory of communications or whatever, but like how much research did I have and what type of sources did I use to assemble this piece of work? Something else I would say is that I have definitely learned that what I like most about working with people in my field is that their presence as a person is enjoyable. I think I was talking to one of my old professors the other day, and I often take on interns in my role. And he was like, what are some of the main skills that you look for so that I can tailor some of my students to be a good fit for your workplace? And most of the time, I don't care if someone's a great writer. I don't care if they've written for certain platforms or like, there's technical skills that you can learn in terms of like platforms that we use to make our jobs easier. But for the most part, I'm interested in working with people who are flexible, who are interested in learning, and who are, enjoyable people to be around, because what people like is to work with people they like. And so I think if you're interested in something, that helps you be a more enjoyable contributor to the work that you're doing. So I don't know if that's directly related to my undergrad, but I think those are some soft skills that I've taken away, is those things that I listed.
Yeah, my neck hurts from how much I was nodding with resonating what you're saying, Hayley. A lot of that really aligns with my own experience as well, both as kind of a student going through the motions, and now on the flip side as a recruiter in terms of what I look for as well. I'll draw specifically on my undergrad and maybe my master's for this question. And at the undergraduate level, to be honest, I got a lot more outside of the school than I did, I think, from the inside. And that was by virtue of the fact that each summer of my first, second, and third year, I took it upon myself to kind of seek out international volunteer experiences that led me to South Africa in 2009 and 11, and then in Ghana in 2010. So for 3 summers in a row, I was kind of building up real experience on the ground, and seeing, what it meant to function and work in these kinds of areas, which is really important for someone studying international development. I could do a whole other panel on voluntourism and the challenges that come and could be very problematic about the kind of work I may have even been doing at the time. That's neither here nor there right now. But it taught me a lot about the kind of development professional I wanted to be. And it also meant that by the time I finished undergrad and started interviewing for various things, including the Aga Khan Fellowship, I had a lot of kind of street cred to bring to the table, and had built up a lot of that experience. There are co-op programs, obviously, that you can do. There's even classes that will let you do kind of international research placements, or this may look different for someone studying comms. So whatever this looks like for you, I'll leave it to you to decide, but just to really expand the boundary of what you're going to get from your undergraduate years to look beyond, just what you can get on campus. And the university is not always going to hand you those answers. But, thinking back to what Hayley was saying about having a lot of time at that point in your life, maybe you do and maybe you don't, but if you do, try to capitalize on it as much as possible. On my master's, what I'll say is that, when I was getting my master's, to be very candid, I was really doing a bit of a tick the box exercise. Like I said, I knew that in my sector, I needed an MA to get the kind of job that I wanted. But I was also being told, it doesn't really matter what your MA is in. It's just you just need to have it. And, on the recruiting side, a lot of times they just request an MA only to filter out candidates, because it goes from you receiving 500 applicants to only receiving maybe 200 if you require a master's degree. So for some positions, it's nothing more than just a filtering exercise. And I thought that's what it was going to be for me. So I figured I'm just going to bite the bullet and get it done, which allowed me to kind of pick a program that I was really passionate and interested in, which ended up being international conflict resolution and mediation. And I studied at Tel Aviv University in Israel on conflict resolution and mediation. And I put a lot of thought into that decision. Obviously, regardless of anyone's political views on the Arab-Israeli conflict, I think we all recognize it's a contentious issue. And to put that as a permanent stamp on my CV for the rest of my life was something I thought a lot about in terms of what that would look like to employers and recruiters and what have you. But what it's ended up doing for me is really making me a memorable candidate, and so as you're thinking through different steps you take, different, things that you're committing to and going to be putting on your CV for the rest of your life, or at least the next few years, think about the implications of that, either for better or for worse, and try to find things that you can be adding to your CV that will stand out. Because, I don't know what positions you're looking at, but recruiters are getting, for a lot of positions, hundreds of CVs to sift through, and you want to be the candidate that they remember and that stands out. And so what are the things that you're both doing in practice, and then how are you transferring those onto paper in a way that is really memorable? And I think particularly from communications professionals, recruiters are going to want to see, how can you communicate to me how great you are, and how quickly will that message sink in for me, and will it stick? Because if you can do that on yourself, if you can sell yourself effectively, then you can probably sell my product effectively. So yeah, I would just say those are kind of my two key takeaways: is maximize the time during schooling, even if it's off campus, and then think about how your experiences are building your own brand.
Thank you for those fantastic answers. I'm so inspired by all the work that you've done, and I wish that we had several hours to sit here together because I have so much to say. Before we move on to the fourth question, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug the current elections for the Undergraduate Communication Students Association, as well as the Upper Communication Graduate Students Association. The Undergrad Association is currently in their nomination period. So if you're an undergrad student in communications watching this video live, you have until Friday to collect 15 names to support your candidacy for a position on the CSA. And being involved in student politics, like I've been involved, I know Nicolette mentioned that she was involved in the CGSA when she was at Ottawa U. I was involved in student politics at law school. It's a great way to build those soft skills, to build the hard skills, to develop your portfolio, and to build your resume. So I'm going to plug the student elections for both the undergrad and graduate students association, and we can provide more information about that at the end of tonight's event. So thank you for the opportunity. Gab, it's all yours.
No, thank you. So our last question is, what surprised you, or what were you not ready for in the workforce?
Alors, notre dernière question à préparer, c'est qui vous a surpris ou que vous n'étiez pas prêt à faire sur le marché du travail?
So my answer to this is twofold. I think the first one would be how the various generations would work together or not in the workforce. I wasn't used to having different generations of folks kind of contributing various ideas, point of views, schools of thought, and kind of bringing that all together. So that was definitely a learning experience for me right out of the, I guess, the gate, to use a Gigi's term. But like Hayley, you know, you start to develop those synergies, and you start to find the people with who you mesh with and who you connect with. And that just kind of happens organically. And then I think the second thing that I would mention, we just talked about a lot, I find recently, and it might just be, you know, the echo chambers that I'm part of in my media consumption, but imposter syndrome, and just feeling like, you know, being surrounded by such capable and smart individuals, and wondering if I measure up, and, you know, should I speak up during a meeting? Should I instead sit and listen and learn before? So I think just having an understanding of, you know, being worthy, and it's important to be humble, of course, and to sit back and learn and observe as much as you can, but also be confident, I think, would be my advice.
Yeah, I would directly echo that. I was going to say the same thing. The generational thing is really interesting too, but also just, yeah, working with diversity of thought is really exciting. Yeah, you come from a program in an undergraduate degree where all of the people have the same base level of knowledge as you. They have the same interests as you because they're doing the same type of learning. But in a workplace, there's different departments, there's different functional areas, there's different levels of expertise. So it's, I think when I talked about being flexible and adaptable and working well with other people, I think is a really important skill, especially now that we're in this kind of virtual workspace for the next while, is that's become a little bit more pressing in terms of how amplified those you know, those divides, but also those bridges can be. And on the imposter syndrome part, I think, you know, there's a bunch of women on this panel too, and I know that this is also quite a racialized issue when we talk about imposter syndrome because of, you know, traditional inherent biases that exist in the workforce. And so something that's been really important to me, especially as a young professional, is finding an advocate in the place that you're working or volunteering, someone who can see your value and your worth and is willing to speak up for you when maybe those situations aren't easy for you to do so. In that same vein, you never have to know everything. I've been working in my current organization for 4 years, and I still feel like every day there's something new that I have to become informed about. And I'm always like, how did I get here? Because I don't know anything about any of these things. But every day I also come to work and I say, okay, well, let's learn about this thing so that I can now do it. My first position at United Way was as the manager of media relations, and I had never done media relations before. And so there was this level of expected expertise, and I had like kind of, crafted some of my experiences to show that I could do it. But maybe I didn't have the direct experience to be able to do it. But I convinced them and I started doing it, and now I'm an expert at it. So I think there's also just this willingness to learn. And like, as stupid as it sounds, my boss always tells me this because he makes a joke that I fooled him, but it worked out well in the end. But you got to fake it sometimes. You got to show, you got to sell yourself and hype yourself up, and you can live up to those expectations of yourself and that other people have of you if you're willing to kind of take that initiative and push it forward. So yeah, being solutions oriented, being willing to learn, and finding that confidence, which is probably the hardest part in the early days, is, feeling like you know nothing, but know that you don't have to know everything, I think is the most important part.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to drive home the imposter syndrome like phenomena too much further, but just to say it completely resonates. And I just went through it like on this most recent transition that I went through. I never thought that at this point in my career, I would be at like a director level and managing what I'm currently managing. And even as I was applying for it, like I seriously contemplated going for another opening that was kind of right under the director, and I toyed back and forth, and it was my partner who was my advocate and told me, like, if you don't bet on yourself, no one else is going to do it for you. So I think that a lot of times we downplay our own capacity, or we're our own kind of harshest critic. So you sometimes just kind of have to take the chance. And a helpful way to do that, if you have kind of the right scenario to test it, is like when you're not job hunting, if you're still in school for a little bit, or if you're currently in a job that you're really happy with, go and apply for one of those like blue sky jobs and just see what that application process looks like. And that way, if it pans out the way you think it will, which is that you're not going to get the offer, you'll learn from that experience, and then you can use that later down the road when you're actually ready to be applying for those jobs seriously. And that's something that I really encourage. I heard Hayley's point earlier around looking at the job descriptions of, future jobs that you're interested in and working towards those qualifications. But the other thing is, even when you're in a position that you're really happy with and you have no intention of leaving, don't get stale on like how it feels to be in the recruitment process, because when you are ready to leave 5 years after being in the same place for half a decade, your interviewing skills are going to be rusty, your CV is going to need a good dusting off. And so try to keep all of that stuff really alive and vibrant, even during those, times where you're very happy where you are, so that you're prepared when that moment comes. And sometimes it comes unopened and you didn't see it coming. You didn't know you were going to be job hunting all of a sudden. So it's helpful to be prepared for it. As far as one thing that's been really challenging for me about kind of the workforce and that I wasn't prepared for, and it comes with that transition from academia to working, is how much control I lost over my own quality of work. And like, I know that in undergrad or any academic program, you're often doing group work, and that's supposed to kind of build those skills of what it means to collaborate. But it's still in a relatively sheltered environment, and one in which everyone's going to get the same grade. And, it's very different in the workforce, I find, where, especially, I mean, for myself, I have many of the colleagues that I rely on to do my job well are, on continents half a world away and different time zones with very, spotty Wi-Fi. And so there's a lot of different factors at play. Many of whom I've never met and some that I will never meet. And I'm relying on them to do their job well so that I can then do my job well and bring all of that back up to, for instance, our donor, Global Affairs Canada. So it's an interesting dynamic to, as somebody who's a bit of a control freak and always, I always hold myself to certain standards, to now be relying so heavily on other people's quality of work. And it's a big adjustment and a kind of transition that I had to go through both personally and professionally
change, not necessarily lower expectations, but change expectations and change the way I work to make sure that I could still be satisfied with my outputs whilst kind of meeting other people where they're at, and recognizing that they might not work the same way I do and they may not value the same things I do. So that's something that I would have liked to probably be more prepared for.
All right, yeah, thank you. So that completes all of the questions we had for you. So we will now open the floor to the audience.
Alors, on a terminé la période de questions préparées. C'est à vous, à notre audience, de poser les questions que vous voulez. Vous pouvez soit lever vos mains, ou sinon, vous pouvez poser les questions en écrit dans le chat, et soit moi ou Gabrielle, on va les poser à haute voix. So feel free to use the chat if you have any questions for our fantastic panelists this evening. I think while we're waiting for them to come in, I might take like moderator's privilege and ask one of the first questions. And again, I have so much to say based on the fantastic presentations and answers that you gave this evening. Over the course of the four events that we've organized this year, one of the common questions that comes up, and you've each spoken about this a little bit in terms of following your passion or ensuring that the organizations that you work for line up with your values. Nicolette, you spoke a lot about networking. In our last event on jobs in the public sector, we had our panelists who were speaking in detail about like the actual application process and how when you're applying for government, it's very, very specific, and you have to use the keywords that are in the ads in order to get through the screening process. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about finding organizations and or the application process for working for or volunteering for different organizations in the not-for-profit sector.
When I first started applying for jobs, I mean, I'm not a pro at this by any means, but I used to look at Charity Village all the time. And whether or not I was interested in those jobs that were posted, it was an opportunity for me to kind of do some research about those organizations and what they were doing in my community. Yeah, I think at a high level, that's where I started with that and kind of grew my understanding of what types of work were going on in my community that maybe I didn't know about.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point, Hayley. I know that for myself, even in the fall, as I was kind of thinking about new opportunities and directions, I started using LinkedIn a lot more strategically and understanding how it actually functions. And so, I mean, when people talk about networking, both as like a giver and a receiver of LinkedIn invites, I'm not a fan of just adding everyone in sight and sending out 300 invites a day. But what I'm an increasingly big fan of is a lot more openness to people who I might not have like a direct, like I met you at this conference and we really got on well together, but you know, like you have the kind of job I want to be at in 5 years. Like those are thoughtful people to be adding. And then what ends up happening is anytime that person not only shares, you know, a posting for a job they're recruiting for, but what they like something else that's relevant, that'll show up on your news feed. And so it's a lot more interconnected. And I'm now not job hunting. I have a friend who is, and my LinkedIn, because I went through that exercise in the fall, is just like flooded with job descriptions and postings that I'm sending her all the time. And so there is a way for me to use LinkedIn really strategically without kind of bombarding everyone's inbox all the time. And so I would encourage you to think about that. The other thing I would say is I kind of am like Hayley in that I don't self-identify as a huge networker, but when you do have good contacts that at one point you did work with or you felt aligned with, like keep those warm. And especially now as somebody who is in a position to recruit, I have like less appetite for someone to just reach out to me after 5 years of like no contact and ask for a job versus somebody who does like a casual check-in and be like, oh, I finished my thesis. This was the topic. Here's the link. Or, you know, somebody who has demonstrated to me that I'm more than just like a potential future paycheck. So find ways to keep those relationships warm. And I mean, the best example I can kind of think of to prove how important this is when I was in Tel Aviv starting to job hunt. I think I applied for 20 jobs more or less as I was coming to the end of graduation. I got 2 interviews And they were the only two with which I had connections at those organizations. And eventually those both led to potential job offers. And that's not a coincidence. And now that I'm on the recruiting side of things, if I have two equally strong candidates on paper with the same qualifications, the same degree, the same everything, but I know one of them personally, I'm probably more inclined to hire them. And I don't think that's bias. I think that's, you know, a lot less risk, because quite frankly, reference checks to me mean very little. No one's ever going to give reference names for somebody who is going to give them a bad reference. I think that's pretty clear. So if I can be my own reference on somebody because I've seen them in action and I know what they're going to bring to the table, that means a lot. Or if I've got a close colleague whose judgment I really trust, that's like, hey, you should look at this person because, you know, they can really do this well. That goes a very long way. And I'm not going to just hire someone because somebody really likes them. But again, if I'm really straddling two candidates, that could be the tipping point, and you want to be that person. So be the person that people kind of keep in their mind, and not just that you reach out to them when it's convenient for you at a time where, you know, you're looking for a job. And that can be as simple as a coffee date. It can, and even those you want to be selective of, because you don't want to like draw on everyone's time all the time, but be very intentional about when and how you reach out, and make it about more than just, I need a job, can you fill that gap for me?
I want to kind of grow on that a little bit, because I think Tracey and I have both indicated that we're not huge networkers, but I think we have used networking as a strategic tool when it's appropriate, perhaps. I did the Algonquin College Public Relations program after university, and I admittedly was not super engaged with university. I don't think it was like the best environment for me. I was very much like a hands-on learner, so college was a great experience for me. But we had a Facebook group of all the students in the class to help each other with homework questions, and that group still exists, and it's full of job postings all the time. When someone works in an organization and they need to fill it, they're looking to their colleagues that they know have experience to be able to do so. I have gotten several people jobs just because I'll hear from colleagues that, you know, this position's been vacant because we haven't been getting the right applicants, or I'm looking for someone with this kind of experience. And so while it's not like going to networking events and meeting people, it's kind of like keeping a Rolodex of the people you've met, and knowing their expertise, and I guess strategically knowing what's of value to them, and showing that mutual value instead of just kind of asking for something all the time is the way that I would approach it.
All right, so we have another question. You guys kind of already touched base on a little bit, but the question is, do you have any advice for future graduates who will be soon entering the workforce?
I mean, one thing for me, and it's not going to work for everyone in your first job, but it's something that I would really recommend putting some thought into. There's pros and cons to it. There's pros and cons to everything, but our generation is known for, you know, rapid movement within the workforce, and, you know, no one has 35-year-long careers anymore, and what those, you know, terms will look like is going to vary for everyone. But I do really see value, if you can, and if it's making sense, in like sticking around an organization long enough to really get beneath the surface and kind of understand the deep kind of functionings of how that organization works. Both because that's a great way to work your way up a ladder, and you're more likely to probably be promoted internally than externally. But B, because yeah, there's a lot of underlying issues and kind of day-to-day strategic thinking that you just don't really get to if you're only there for like a couple quick years to learn the hard skills, and then you're out the door. And for me, I was very fortunate. Like my first, you know, big job out of my master's was with Aga Khan Foundation, and it presented that opportunity. And when I first started as a project officer there, people told me it's a 2-year stint, you'll be in and out, and then outgrow it and go somewhere else. And I didn't hit that mark. And then eventually I got promoted, and, you know, 5.5 years later, like I had learned so much because I did commit and stick around, and it gave me a lot of exposure, which I'm now translating to a whole new organization. So it may not be your first job out of undergrad, but at some point when you're feeling like it's the right place, like try to give it the opportunity to sink into it and see what it feels like to be really a part of a core institution as opposed to just kind of a short-term player within it, because you can get a lot of rich learnings that go way beyond your job description when you do that.
I would also add to that and say, try to learn as much as you can. The things that you learned in the classroom might be different when you actually try to apply them in the real world. And don't take anything personally. If colleagues are giving you feedback, it's probably because they want to help you succeed and not to squash you. So try to take everything as a learning opportunity.
Something that I don't think we've touched on yet, and I don't have like a ton to talk about it, but where possible, seek out mentors in your field as well. People who have been there even just a couple years ahead of you, or maybe more tenured in their career, will often become that advocate I spoke of, and it's also a networking thing, but just having someone that you can bounce ideas off of, I think, is super important. I had a call with one of my professors earlier this week, and we were talking about something in particular, and then I was like, you know what, now that I have you on the phone, I have some like weird organizational challenges that I know you've worked through, and I would like your opinion on these types of things. So just kind of like keeping in touch with people that have knowledge that you can draw on, I think is super helpful in the early days of your career too. And I mean, probably throughout the duration of your career, but I'm not there yet, so.
Yeah, and what I will say on that is much sooner than you probably think you're going to be in the reverse role as well. As much as right now, like you might be in a seat where you feel like you don't really know where you're going and how you're going to contribute to an organization, like it's really quickly going to pivot where others are going to be looking to you for guidance and advice, and you'll be speaking on panels and what have you. And so just retaining that gratitude and that humility and thinking about the ways in which you can kind of pay it forward is also, I think, really important, and not something that you're going to be dealing with 15 years from now when you're like a senior executive. Like it's going to come fast.
Alors, je pense qu'on a temps pour une dernière question pour les panélistes. I think we have time for one more final question for our panelists, which is with your varied backgrounds in education. So you come from different fields: public relations, communications, international development. Why the not-for-profit sector when you could have chosen careers in other sectors?
I think I can answer two. So I'll answer Belisha as well. So yes, I work for a charitable organization presently, a United Way East Ontario. And why not-for-profit for me? So I started actually being enrolled in the journalism program at United Way. I'm there now, at Ottawa. And I did that because I really liked writing and I really liked storytelling. And I thought that would be a good avenue for me to use those skills. But what I quickly learned by circumstances of having a class about public relations in first year, which was something that I had never heard of before, was this idea of using communications and having that as a tool to, elevate public awareness or change public opinion about something. And I thought that my storytelling and my writing ability would be better suited to make like change in the world. That sounds really big and broad, but I felt like journalism was something where I could like shine a light on something, but communications was an opportunity to be an advocate on something, on like a cause or something that I was passionate about. And so for me, that kind of like narrowed it down to not-for-profit organizations, really. As I was trying new things, I really realized that I couldn't do good work unless I believed in what I was working towards. And so that's kind of how I ended up in social services. A lot of the work I do is, connecting isolated seniors in our community and making sure people have their basic needs met through different crises, and looking at how to improve graduation rates in low-income neighborhoods and how to end poverty in certain neighborhoods by addressing systemic barriers and things like that. And when I think of that work, it's not about the communications, it's about the cause. And so I think that's also, to Tracey's point about sticking with an organization, is also a really good way to get invested in a cause and have your work and see it play out in making a difference over the course of time, because change is incremental. I think that's kind of where that stemmed from. When I first started my job, it was on a maternity leave contract. So I was intended to be in that position for 13 months or something like that. And so by the time I got to the end of that time frame, I didn't want to leave, but I was starting to look for things that I was maybe going to pursue next. And I had kind of narrowed it down where I was like, I know I don't want to work on a small communications team, because I really liked working on a team and having that multidisciplinary ability to deliver on our mission. I didn't want to wear a suit to work. And I also didn't want to work for a bank or like an insurance company or something like that. Like, I found myself scrolling through job listings and being like, this isn't for me. Like, I can't imagine myself there. And I mean, in the end, I luckily, the woman whose maternity leave was up, she had decided to find something a bit, like in communications, you often get called outside of work hours, which my job has a lot of heavy involvement in. And with a young child, she found something that was a bit more stable 9 to 5, so she could raise her kids in that way. But so I got to stay, but yeah, it was really an exercise. And I think by looking at the job market every once in a while, it kind of reminds you about where you want to be and what aligns with your values and how you can continue to work towards that. That's my soapbox, I guess.
I'll go next, and I'll answer Felicia's question as well. So my 9 to 5 is agency work, but my 5 to 9 is non-for-profit. So I volunteer after hours with an organization. So I'm not paid to do the work that I do, but I'm passionate about it, and I think I find it rewarding to do it. And why, I think, was the question, why we chose to go into that. I enjoyed the organization. I liked the work that they were doing. And I thought when they were looking to fill the position, I thought that I had the skills required to be able to help elevate them to where they wanted to go. So that was the why. I agreed with their mission, vision, values, but also I knew that I can positively contribute.
I mean, my entry into the nonprofit sector was just really aligned with the overall sector that I was studying, international development. Like, there are other ways. I could work for Global Affairs Canada and different private companies that do consulting, but a lot of the entry points are within the nonprofit sector. So it was just very well aligned. Why I stay in it, and I might not forever, but right now, what I really appreciate about it beyond the values and the fact that, in a lot of ways, it is feel good work. It's also very problematic work, and every single day I have to do a lot of self checks on, are we doing this the right way? And sometimes we're not. How do we improve that? But I'm sure you'll find that in any sector. But when you work in the nonprofit sector, I mean, by virtue of it being non-for-profit, it's lean, and there's always more than enough work to go around, which can sometimes cause, work-life balance challenges. And I've seen those to extreme levels, and then I've seen other organizations that manage them really well. So it's not, a cut across the board. You're always going to be overworked if you work in the sector. But what you'll likely always be is in an environment that will allow you to grow beyond your job description, that will be open to throwing you new challenges or hearing your ideas for efficiencies and innovation in a way that you might not find either in government or in other spaces. And there are some nonprofits that are massive with huge global secretariats, and they're very institutionalized, where things are more regimented. But then there's others where they're younger and leaner, and they're just looking for any way to either cut costs or be more effective. And if you can bring some of that to the table, whether it is your role or not, my experience is that nonprofits are very open to those perspectives and ideas. And that's not only a way to improve the way things are done, but it's also a way to prove yourself and kind of move up that ladder if you stick around long enough to do it. So that's been my experience, and it's one of the things I really like about working in that sector. On the salary question, I mean, I'm not going to get into detailed specifics, but I will say from the inside, it's better than I expected. There are more opportunities for higher salary growth than I would have envisioned in my undergraduate degree. It's sad to me that a lot of recruiters still don't advertise pay scales, and I wish they would. So there are limits to exactly how transparent certain organizations are around that, and how much you'll be able to know when looking through JDs. But I think there's a movement and a push on employers to start increasing that transparency. So hopefully we see more of it. And as you take up, the one kind of common recommendation or one of the many that's come up tonight around looking at job descriptions and seeing where you fit, you'll hopefully get some familiarity around what those pay scales look like. And you might be surprised. So I mean, I wouldn't go into the nonprofit sector for the salaries. I think you're in the wrong place if what you're looking for is the money. But you may not have to trade off every other, financial desire you've ever had at the expense of getting to work in the nonprofit sector. It's not quite as black and white as I once thought it was. So that would be my response to that.
I would just echo that. I think like financially, I've never felt like I can't make ends meet. So like my employer is very much committed to living wages at all levels of the organization, from the entry level and incrementally moving up in different levels of management from there. I think I would echo that, yeah, this isn't the sector to get rich in, but it's the work that provides that value and those opportunities. It's also a great place to start your career if you want to move into the private sector later on. As Tracey mentioned, it's a huge opportunity for growth very quickly early in your career, because there's latitude for you to take on all kinds of different work, to show your potential, to grow quickly, and then you can move on if you want to. I would say that if it's something you are concerned about and the organization isn't upfront and transparent with you, then you might run into a problem once you get inside. But I mean, you would hopefully prompt or question that information at the front, which would make that organization be a bit more transparent about that. I wouldn't just ask about salaries, though. I would also ask for growth opportunities within the organization, because you might come in at a decent salary, but that might be your cap within your sector, because there might not be any positions above that one within the organization for you to move into. So yeah, also asking about what, if I stayed at this organization for 3 years, what would my next step be, and those types of things to look forward to.
All right. Let me just check the chat real quick. All right. Last call for any questions. All right, well, while we're waiting, I'll wrap it up for us. So that concludes our final job talk session. I want to thank our panelists for joining us tonight and sharing your experiences on the non-for-profit sector. I'm sure many students have benefited from your insights and have enjoyed hearing from you. I definitely have, as a student who's graduating and really doesn't know what she wants to do. This has really opened up my eyes. I didn't really know about the non-for-profit before this, so yeah, it was a really great learning opportunity for me personally. On behalf of the CSA and the CGSA, I also want to thank the students for coming out and virtually attending our Job Talks events throughout the year. We hope that you've benefited from these events and have perhaps gained some insight on what you might be interested in pursuing after graduation. If there's something that we did that you enjoyed or thought that we could have improved on, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your night and the rest of your semester.
Alors, juste en français pour terminer l'événement, ça conclut notre dernière session du série d'emploi en communication de cette année. Je tiens à remercier à nos panélistes, à Nicolette, Hayley et Tracey pour leur temps ce soir et de nous avoir rejointes en ligne et de partager leur expérience de travail dans le secteur à but non lucratif. And I knew I would say that right by the end of the evening. Je suis sûre que de nombreux étudiants et étudiantes ont bénéficié de vos réflexions et ont apprécié de vous entendre. Au nom nom de l'AÉEC et de l'AÉEC-AÉDC, je tiens également à remercier tous les étudiants qui ont venu cette année pour participer à ces événements virtuels. Et nous espérons que vous avez profité de ces événements et que vous avez peut-être pu voir, pu faire une idée de qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire après obtenir vos diplômes. S'il y a quelque chose que nous avons fait que vous a plu ou que nous aurions pu améliorer, n'hésitez pas à nous le faire savoir. Merci et profitez du reste de votre soirée et du reste de notre semestre d'hiver.